Have you wanted to learn more about philosophy and spirituality but felt intimidated by ancient Greek or Sanskrit? Is it too embarrassing to admit that we are more than the body? Are you afraid to bring up reincarnation over coffee? Well, we love coffee, and Plato, Buddhism, and Sri Ramana Maharshi. And we think these teachers and systems have some use today. This is the Beware How program, Mystic Philosophy Made Practical. I'm Bob, speaking weekly with Scott and Ryan. We're three conscious creatives and formerly closeted mystics trying to unpack the inaccessible. According to the mystics, the truth cannot be spoken, but we'll try to talk about it anyway. Hello, I'm Bob, and this is the Beware How program. Today is Monday, May 4th, and we will be discussing the second of three categories of content that this project is focused on: mindful, metaphysical, and non-dual. I kind of wrote a ton about each of these, so it really makes more sense to break these up into individual episodes. This is number 2 on metaphysical material. The typical format of this show is more actually around personal kind of realizations around this material, moving into context around the philosophy as kind of an act 2, some academic context, and then finally closing with practical application of. We want to give you and also remind us of tools that are kind of day-to-day living as kind of the wrap-up. But these initial episodes are a bit unique because we have to do some defining first initially. Mainly me. I will be rambling on, and Scott and Ryan will help make them less endless and more entertaining. So jumping right in, working with the spiritual material over the years, about 10 years, 12 years or so of reading these books and going through some of these practices. These are really these categories are original to the Beware How program and the Beware How project. Mindful, metaphysical, and non-dual. We did mindful last week. Go check it out. This is metaphysical. And metaphysical just means beyond physics, right? Beyond the physical. It really makes the jump, metaphysical does, and it's where we lose some people, frankly. Where mindful is secular, very universal, easier for people to kind of understand and kind of resonate with, probably more on like a per capita basis. Metaphysics, we lose some people. Although, as we'll touch on today, quantum physics and different kind of disciplines, scientific disciplines, are starting to throw in some big question marks onto, the shakiness of the mainstream academic scientific view of reality is starting to get some revealing or some unveiling that's really exciting. We'll get to that. I wrote this piece on the chakras. We were talking about, I think it was in, I don't remember which episode it was, but we were talking about kind of outing ourselves, and the intro talks about formerly closeted mystics. And so for me, writing this article on explaining the chakras on Medium was fairly much a coming out party for me, because it went to my personal Facebook, and now I'm that cousin. And I was before. Let's be honest. It wasn't that new.
Just confirmed it.
Yeah, exactly. If any aunts were like, is he? Yes. Yep. He wrote a thing on the chakras. So basically, if you don't know what they are, they're centers of energy on the astral plane of non-gross matter. They correspond to centers. It's a Hindu and Buddhist and a variety of Eastern ideologies term. Centers of energy that go up the spine. And what I talk about in the beginning of the article is you're not going to see them in an X-ray. They're not going to get picked up in a medical facility. And I say, quote, 200 years ago, we did not have adequate equipment to detect radio waves, let alone the quantum fields at the subatomic level. Our capacity to understand phenomena is not fixed. It is constantly progressing towards a fuller truth. So, not crazy about quoting myself, but that's a key aspect of metaphysics to me, is that, society's getting there. We're kind of starting to uncover a fuller reality, underneath it all. And really, a big presence today is Yogananda. Paramahansa Yogananda is who I'm really borrowing very heavily from. He even has a radio analogy that he uses from his autobiography of a yogi, which you will hear in this program quite a bit, is the book that he wrote about his life. And there's a scene about his guru, Sri Yukteswar, where when he was a young monk, young Swami in India, they left the monastery on this kind of field trip, and his guru describes this kind of goofy burglar who enters their room and steals cauliflowers that young Yogananda was growing and had hidden well, and he kind of, from a distance, explained this entire situation. Yogananda says this: "The plot of the cauliflower comedy can best be understood by a radio analogy. Sri Yukteswar was a perfect human radio. Thoughts are no more than very gentle vibrations moving in the ether. Just as a sensitized radio picks up a desired musical number out of thousands of other programs from every direction, so my guru had been able to catch the thought of the half-witted man who hankered for a cauliflower out of the countless thoughts of broadcasting human wills in the world. Intuition is soul guidance, appearing naturally in man during those instants when his mind is calm. Nearly everyone has had the experience of an inexplicably correct hunch, or has transferred his thoughts effectively to another person. The human mind, free from the static of restlessness, can perform through its antenna of intuition all the functions of complicated radio mechanisms, sending and receiving thoughts and tuning out undesirable ones. As the power of a radio depends on the amount of electrical current it can utilize, so the human radio is energized according to the power of will possessed by each individual." Last piece here, he says, "All thoughts vibrate eternally in the cosmos. By deep concentration, a master is able to detect the thoughts of any mind, living or dead. Thoughts are universally and not individually rooted. A truth cannot be created, but only perceived. The erroneous thoughts of man result from imperfections in his discernment. The goal of yoga science is to calm the mind, that without distortion it may mirror the divine vision in the universe." Very articulate. He just wrote so clearly about this stuff. It's pretty obvious why that book is so popular. But I just love the radio analogies and his kind of scientific, explanations are one of the reasons why he's so popular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, similar to that. Something that Jennifer Miller says frequently is your body is a tuning fork. You are able to pick up subtle energies, specifically emotional energies from the people around you, and if the closer you listen to what your body is telling you, you'll kind of realize you are picking up on things, And she really pushes to follow that. Like, what is your feeling? What is your body feeling when communicating with people? And reminds me a lot of that radio analogy.
That's great. I've heard of even like the water in a body might have something to do with that. I don't know how scientific that is.
Sure.
But like if we're 70%, 75% water, like the kind of vibrational aspects.
I enjoyed the to add another analogy, which, obviously these are all just approximations to kind of help your mind wrap around a larger concept. But the analogy of water filtering sunlight, and I guess I'm not sure, that might have been Gober, I'm not sure, but like sunlight being consciousness and water filtering that, and that you're the calmer the water, the clearer the light can pass through it. And that one, when I first heard that one, I was like, oh, that one really clicked with me. It made kind of gave me a really good image to use.
Sure. It filters the light, which is pure from the source, but as soon as we kind of add our filtration layer to it, it curves, and the straw has like the curve in the cup, and yeah, totally.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so what metaphysical really means and what it has a lot to do with is, I think as Ryan said, paying attention to the body, but using that awareness to understand expansion beyond our bodies, right? And that's really what you're getting at. That's what Jennifer was saying is,
Yep.
There's qualities kind of expanding beyond the body that is reflected in it. And, thankfully now contemporary science is starting to erode some of the, kind of dominance of the scientific viewpoint, which is called scientific materialism. And the three of us are not scientists, but we can talk about it and be self-aware about where we're at on this stuff. Essentially, scientific materialism is materialism different from like cultural or capitalistic materialism. Although there is some overlap, as Rupert Sheldrake describes, but the idea is that matter is fundamental to reality. There's an illustration of kind of physical matter, and then you have chemistry, biological organisms, brains, and then consciousness. This kind of scientific materialism in kind of a hierarchical structure, which. It's basically in a sense it is a relic of the 17th and 18th centuries, angry Victorian intellectuals. It's like it was the age of reason and rational thinking that were reacting to the religious institutions. I mean, Terence McKenna talks a lot about this as a historian about the power of the Vatican and these kind of European intellectuals that, we're also starting to see, real legitimate scientific experiments start to emerge. And it became this very kind of almost violent turn away from religious principles. And, I think really what happened too, and I didn't really prepare on this, so I'm ad-libbing on this a little bit, but what happened was, when science and religion, when science started to disprove aspects of kind of the religious scriptures a few centuries ago, you saw like religious, a variety of religious systems getting more, actually more fundamental. You have Wahhabism in Islam, which is like this kind of back to, fundamentals, even though I have an issue with that term, but kind of same thing with like the Shakers and the Amish and like Christian Puritans, kind of the same thing. It was like instead of embracing kind of the age of reason's advancements in science, there became new sectarian religion, kind of orthodox extremes that branched out from there. And then you also have kind of mystics that kind of accepted the scientific understanding and I think deism qualifies in there, which a lot of the founding fathers, you can respect science and you can appreciate scripture. It's kind of this middle ground that, neither of which were popular, right? As far as popular religion of that time period, the mainstream religion was still neither of those branches, but those were two kind of repercussions of scientific, age of enlightenment, so to speak.
Yeah, I feel like if the one of the biggest conflicts was just between like a very literal interpretation of scripture and then science, which showed up and was like, actually, you're wrong on this, the earth's not the center of the universe and all these things. And they're like, whoa. Whereas someone who wasn't maybe as tied to an institutional understanding of it would have been like, fine, great. Science is wonderful. Let's keep going with that, and
right. Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we can cure things now. Like maybe because, there can still be, you don't have to disprove creatorhood or aspects of spirituality with those kinds of things. This guy's really good, Rupert Spira, and we'll touch on him too in the non-dual episode, because he's a big-time Advaita teacher. He's a philosopher, but he says, quote, "The materialist perspective is not grounded in experience. It requires an abstract line of reasoning that presupposes the existence of a reality outside of consciousness. Although nobody has ever experienced this, nor could they ever experience it. So the materialist point of view asserts the reality of that which is never experienced. You need conscious beings to kind of verify the existence of a material objective reality.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have some perspective to kind of look on the outside in to confirm its reality. Well, theoretically, it's possible, but it's just it requires a leap of faith, if you will. I mean, that's kind of what Gober in these new paradigm consciousness is fundamental. Scientists point out is materialism has its own kind of Spira says absurdity, which is
yeah, I mean, which, and like you learn that in early, I guess it's not science, but like an early philosophy class, and just like the concept of consciousness and how to prove existence of things. And like you said, it's the scientists consider it like one of the greatest unsolved challenges of what is consciousness, what's it made of, and that
right.
doesn't, you don't need to prove that to do all these other amazing, beautiful things within science. But at the foundation, there's these strange, paradoxical question marks that are still sitting there.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, even in high school, and shout out to Mark Gober, the author of An End to Upside Down Thinking, just kind of what a lot of this material is sourced from. He did a great interview with Rick Archer on Buddha at the Gas Pump. Buddha at the Gas Pump, so great. Rick does an amazing job, so shout out to his work. But yeah, they mentioned in this interview how, like, in high school, you learn that atoms are 99% empty space. Like, how is materialism so ubiquitous still? If high schoolers get that the subatomic level is, there's some question marks going on there. And as far as the hierarchy, Gober in his book has an illustration of consciousness, then physical matter, chemistry, biological organisms, and then brains. To your point, it's like there's still chemical reactions, and there's laws of physics that we can measure, and that doesn't disprove all these different disciplines of science. But you're right. I mean, it's worth investigating. And I think as far as this section, which just wanted to kind of still stay a little bit high level here, but Max Planck, who's a Nobel Prize winning physicist, says, quote, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness." So, I mean, Planck's equation or Planck's formula, something. I mean, it's these guys are very, pioneers and just the titans of science and scientific discoveries in the last 100 years. There's quotes of them like this. I mean, Einstein has quotes that sound, pantheistic and questioning and stuff like that, and just doesn't seem to be, really out there that much. But just kind of real quick, what I'd love to do is just list a couple of scientists that, if you're interested in this material, check out An End to Upside Down Thinking. There is a guy named Bernardo Kastrup, who has a PhD in philosophy and in computer engineering. He wrote a book called Why Materialism is Baloney. Dean Radin, PhD, is a chief scientist at IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is a fascinating organization that looks at these kind of anomalies. He just wrote a book called Real Magic. John Hagelin is a PhD theoretical physicist who did postdoctoral research at CERN, and he's the president of the TM organization, the Transcendental Meditation Organization, founded by Mahesh Yogi. Bruce Lipton talks a lot about this stuff. He was one of the first stem cell researchers in the 70s. Eben Alexander is a neuroscientist who had an NDE. Rupert Sheldrake is a Cambridge University biologist who studied telepathy and all kinds of things like that. Etzel Cardinha is a respected psychologist who researches parapsychology and gets published in mainstream journals. And Brian Josephson is a Nobel Prize winner in physics who talks about kind of the potentiality of parapsychology. So all that said, there are tons of people without PhDs who talk about this, but there are quite a few now with them as well. And it's worth hearing what they have to say.
I also love that. I nerd out about all this stuff because I love, like, especially the history of science in the last 100 years. And like, even, the greats of Max Planck, Einstein, like, they were really wrestling with this stuff when they first started discovering aspects of quantum mechanics, and they had, like, big arguments, like, and Einstein denied it for a while. He couldn't admit it. Like, one of his famous quotes was God doesn't play with dice, or God doesn't roll dice, or something like that, and that was in response to the realization that observing something affects it, and that consciousness might be at the foundation of things. And he pushed back against it for a long time, and I think eventually in some discussion or interview, he years later was like, said something along the lines of that his view of materialism was itself a form of religion, because he had to take the faith that matter was there before we showed up, before consciousness showed up. So yeah, it's really fascinating. I just love that these totally. Giants of the 20th century were really,
they struggled with it for sure.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah. There's a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which is like a perfect segue into the next kind of area here on the agenda. But you're right. I mean, it talks about Thomas Kuhn. It talks about the paradigm is changed very slowly from the outside in. There's always the establishment is always the most ferocious defender of the status quo. Particularly in science and academia, like tenure is on the line for people, and it's very political publishing these kinds of articles, and all of those people that I mentioned who are respected by some or many. But they all have their own critics, and they all have, Brian Josephson was uninvited from a conference. He has a Nobel Prize because he, talks a little bit about telepathy and parapsychology. So, yeah, I mean, there's more to it than just the findings, The human ego is involved here.
Yeah, one of the most kind of interesting parts of that Mark Gober interview for me with on the Buddha at the Gas Pump show was when he was talking about trying to get his book published and reaching out to different organizations, and kind of realizing how a lot of organizations, scientific organizations, are just not open to it. They're just simply not open to it, and it immediately for me just seems so unscientific to like say that that is not the way that it goes. I've always felt like the basis of science is to constantly question everything, right? Like question everything, including everything that you think you know, because we're continually, it's happened time and time again in our human history that we've realized something that we were wrong about something, and so that part is that's a big hurdle.
It's the best part of science.
Yeah,
is the exploration of the new frontier, discovery.
Right.
Mm.
So how dare these guys, kind of sit here and refuse, sit in stagnation.
Yeah, he was talking to a publisher, and he said, if I were to publish this, it would basically mean my last 30 years of research is completely null and void.
Right.
And it's kind of like yeah, maybe, like you should be open to that. Like,
yeah, and
There's a lot on the line, man.
I'm always trying to, I don't know, I guess this is devil's advocate, but I understand the pushback because like we all know about the questioning of the theory of evolution, for example, and how that comes from this very like dogmatic source of literal interpretation of the Bible, and it didn't say it in there, so and how do you know? You can't know for sure. And so like there's some scars, there's some wounds from those battles in our past, and like the battles of science
in our
like,
present.
In our present and our future, yeah. And so I get it. I get the pushback. Like there are in it does make sense that it needs to be hard for new things to break into the accepted canon of science, and it prevents like fraud and charlatans from working their way into spots of power. So there are good reasons, but you have to consider that like I think it was Gober mentions a quote that like most truths start as blasphemy, and then they're violently opposed, and then they're just accepted as self-evident after that. So like there kind of almost has to be this battle in a way.
Yeah,
totally. Giordano Bruno was the guy who said, or one of the early thinkers, and he was a Christian, who realized that stars are suns, had quite the realization and talked about it and was burned at the stake. For something that we all take for granted. So yeah, absolutely. I think we should definitely just, this is really my bit, but not to be too redundant, definitely want to cover more of this. Because I want to read a couple of those books. I haven't read Real Magic, and I love ions. And I think we could really dig in on this subject, but I'm going to keep going on metaphysical material, if that's all right to you guys.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, again, I mean, the root of metaphysical material, we are not confined to our bodies. So any kind of soulful type of stuff is metaphysical. Not for everyone. Again, I get it, but it is for some people. And really, I mean, the soul aspect and that idea, that concept is very universal. It's across pretty much every world religion, every world culture. It's not just Christians, Jews, and Muslims. It's also the Hindus, of which there are thousands of, sects within that. Ancient Greeks talked about souls. Ancient Egyptians, obviously, were pretty concerned about soul travel and having all their trinkets with them. And the Buddhists, I think, actually are probably more complicated because of this concept anatta, which means no self or non-self. We'll get into that in the future probably, but even the Vajrayana, the Tibetan Buddhism, has a lot of astral plane stuff going on, a lot of soul travel. So I think most people are fairly familiar with the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, religions that are formed by the children of Abraham. So I'll move ahead for now. We did a nice episode on Christianity for Easter. Probably do the others later. But metaphysical really, it does have to do with ancient stuff. Kind of in addition to modern quantum discoveries, the shamanistic traditions, the indigenous traditions and tribal cultures across the world, Siberia, Africa, Peru, America, New Guinea, in the Iron Age and earlier, these tribal communities had, they all really, had a similar role of the medicine man or the shaman, who that's what they were doing. They were doing kind of, soul illness type of work. Terence McKenna, who, I feel like I keep mentioning because he was just terrific. He describes shamans as having multiple kind of modern roles in one: doctor, scientist, and artist. They worked with metal, they told stories, and they healed the sick. all of those things. But the most relevant to this discussion is that they dealt with planes of reality, beyond this one, beyond this tangible one. They
so
certainly worked.
They were also a travel agent. I was just adding to their list
right.
list of roles.
astral booking. Yes, and psychedelics played a role in that. Psychedelic plants and fungi, and they would traverse into these other spiritual realms. They would have visions. Native American spirituality, which is not homogeneous, it is certainly varied. But several tribes in the Southwest in particular have vision quests, which are journeys of the mind where you get messages that ain't from here. So, there's just a lot to the metaphysics stuff. And that's kind of what I know. I'm going quick here, but I kind of just want to, for me, it's almost like the more of it existing, I don't know if it doesn't prove it. And we can touch on that or talk about that later, but you got to admit, in comparative religion, seeing all these kinds of ideas across the globe are interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's we as is we should state over and over again. Obviously, we are not scientists, and proving things isn't our craft.
That's clear.
And luckily, there are a lot of people who that is their job, is to hunt down these clues and hints to prove things. But there has to be some sort of delineation between pure science and what we are talking about with our minds. And I don't know, I'm not sure what I'm saying, but I guess the basis of this comes back to the idea that that it's starting to seem more apparent that consciousness is at the base of everything instead of matter. And that's just all these tangents kind of for me come back to that
totally
that truth to me.
I'm a consciousness is fundamental crew. For what it's worth.
I was gonna say, I feel like the three of us, and we've been having these conversations for a long time, but the reason we talk about this stuff is because it feels right to us, right? Right. We're not trying to scientifically prove it. These are things that we all feel that are true. The more that I read it, the more that I, again, same as you, see that many religions and spiritual cultures across millennia and all over the world are experiencing similar things. It begins to feel true to me, and it's really just, I think it's important that you follow what feels right to you, what resonates with you, and what vibes with you. And so I know that there's a necessary component to kind of trying to scientifically prove a lot of this stuff, but it doesn't, for me, it doesn't take away anything that I could be learning from it,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. The experience is so important. And I wrote this later, but I'll jump ahead because podcasts are spontaneous. And it feels wrong to sit on this point for too long. What I've told a friend of mine who's an atheist was, I've had a thimbleful of experiences. And I'm this excited about this material. And this, I'm pretty certain that, at least what I said in the thesis in one of these other episodes was that there's more to it all than our senses, too. I think beyond the bodily, big time aspect of metaphysical material is kind of beyond senses. Well, science does prove actually that there's a lot more going on. Beyond our sensual stimuli and response system. The UV spectrum is massively larger than what our human eye can detect. There's a lot of audio waves that we can't hear. I think those are kind of affirmations in a sense that there are aspects of reality as we know it that go beyond, what we can see and prove and verify with our own cognitive capacities.
Yeah, I think it always brings me back to what you were saying earlier, which is, as we've evolved, we've developed new scientific practices that have been able to prove things, but there's always been something ahead, right? That we just can't prove yet because we don't have the tools or the capabilities to do that. And so that right there is the whole foundation of why I'm able and willing to try this stuff on, you know? And I that's kind of how I
No, we got it.
Yeah, right.
Just
I kind of I try and offer that to people who are interested in it. Like, you don't have to believe that it's true, just try it on. See how it feels, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And again, Mark Gober, he's just the theme of this episode. Mark, maybe we'll get you on someday. He does interviews with people like this. He quotes, there's a Lord Kelvin quote, who was this, European noble, but also I think it's where we get the Kelvin scale of temperature. He was a scientist a couple centuries ago, and he said there are 2 black clouds remaining. Which he said like dismissively, like he's like, there's only like 2 little tiny black clouds that we don't of science that we don't know. We kind of got it. We got Darwin. We got evolution and biological processes. We've improved on Aristotle quite a bit, and but there's these 2 little clouds. Well, those 2 clouds turned out to be relativity and quantum physics. 2 of the most spellbindingly mysterious and earth-shattering mind stuff, that we still don't know, this many years later. So it's cartoonish to think that this is all there is.
We've made quite a few discoveries since Kelvin too that are equally mysterious, like the fact that 96% of our universe is made of dark matter and dark energy, and we're still trying to figure out what in the hell those are. So that's just to add to that, but yeah.
Yeah, totally. No, that's great. I wanted to mention too, there's another ancient teaching that is very metaphysical, called the Hermeticism, or the Hermetic philosophy, which admittedly I'm pretty new to. I mean, I've been working with Hinduism for 10 years and comparative religion, back in the day. And this one has kind of crept up on me a couple years ago. It's an ancient Egyptian and ancient Greek system. It's very, very old. We don't have a lot about it. And the texts were also suppressed during the Middle Ages. One of the most well-known texts is called the Kybalion, which is very interesting. And the authors are the 3 initiates, which piques my esoteric interest. Really far out stuff, but it's really good. This is from the Kybalion. It says, quote, "The vibration of spirit is at such an infinite rate of intensity and rapidity that it is practically at rest, just as a rapidly moving wheel seems to be motionless. And at the other end of the scale, there are gross forms of matter whose vibrations are so low as to seem at rest. Between these poles, there are millions upon millions of varying degrees of vibration. From corpuscle and electron, atom and molecule, to worlds and universes, everything is in vibratory motion. This is also true on the planes of energy and force, which are but varying degrees of vibration, and also on the mental planes, whose state depend on vibrations, and even on the spiritual planes. An understanding of this principle, with the appropriate formulas, enables Hermetic students to control their own mental vibrations as well as those of others. The masters also apply this principle to conquering of natural phenomena in various ways." Pretty far out.
Yeah, wait.
It's about 100 years old.
But yeah, what is that source?
The Kybalion. It is. Sorry, let me get a year. I think it's 1905.
Oh, okay.
Should have said that
Wow.
before. But it reads very contemporarily.
Yeah.
And it's cool. I mean, I'm messing with it.
Yeah,
it's not, I don't know. It's not magic necessarily, because mysticism isn't magic. Magicians are like, to me, like Chris Angel, and that's not, that's different. Sleight of hand. No offense, magicians. I don't know. Did I just offend all magicians?
We just lost half of our viewership. Great.
Shit. JK, love magic. Love Siegfried and Roy. But yeah, check out the Kybalion. It's all free online, but it says there's other stuff like, quote, nothing stands still. Everything is being born, growing, dying. The very instant a thing reaches its height, it begins to decline. The law of rhythm is in constant operations. Do not make the mistake of supposing that the little world you see around you, the earth, which is a mere grain of dust in the universe, is the universe itself. There are millions upon millions of such worlds and greater. There are millions of millions of such universes in existence within the infinite mind of the all. So,
love it.
Pretty far out and pretty cool. Yeah.
No, that's great.
Multiverse
I haven't
theory
read
vibe.
too much about it.
Yeah. 100 plus years ago.
But I totally resonate with all that. I've always
Yeah,
kind
you
of
dig it.
believe that like everything, like literally everything can be explained down to a vibration. Like everything we know happens in vibrations. It's an oscillation. It's part of what sparked my curiosity in analog synthesis.
Yeah, I was gonna say, spoken like a musician.
Music.
Yeah. But that right there expands on that in a really beautiful way. It's really cool. I like that.
I'm glad you like, yeah. Yeah, definitely in the esoteric category, but you know, I mean, I think back to the science point, the vibration piece, I mean, now we understand the protons, neutrons, electrons are all moving. I mean, I don't think they knew that then. I mean, or at least they didn't know it quite as sophisticated as we know now. But there's no static anything. It's all a lie. Let's see. We're going to keep it moving. Hermetic philosophy, what up? You know, and kind of related to that, energy, vibration. I mean, Yogananda uses the word vibratory phenomena quite a bit. So that exists in Hinduism and kind of Vedic philosophy, certainly. You know, energy healing, I think, applies with that. I'm hesitant to talk a ton about it, but I'm open to it. You know, maybe we'll go into this in the future, but and maybe I've mentioned this in the past. I don't know what we published or not, but we have a family friend. My family has a friend who is an Apache shaman. Ryan knows him well. And he's an energy healer. He has guided my life in a variety of ways. He did recommend literature to me. He grew up on the reservation. He's a medicine man. He has a day job, but he also has a night job. He's always kind of healing people, and he doesn't have a business card, which some shamans do, and that's cool. Some shamans have websites, but not this guy. And you know, I honestly probably would be more of a skeptic, to respect the skeptical point of view, if he hadn't actually healed members of my own family. He's definitely done healing work on people that I know and love and care about. So, you know, I think having that kind of personal validation, I mean, back to the experiential aspect, you know, well, maybe meeting that person in my life, you know, did kind of push me down the rabbit hole a bit, that I might not have gone as far, just being a comparative religion scholar, but actually kind of studying this stuff in conjunction with, you know, the friendship of this guy. And maybe if I wasn't studying comparative religion, I wouldn't be open to him, you know, I don't know, but both happened. And, you know, here I am talking for an hour plus on metaphysics. So
no, that is
that
is a rare experience of yours.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I agree too. I mean, I feel like my perspective on energy healing dramatically shifted after I met Richard and got to know him and experienced certain things with him.
Yeah.
And even on to Jennifer Miller too. I mean, she works in a very similar aspect. It can easily be defined as energy work, really. For Richard, I know kind of works under the same pretense where she's not doing the healing, he's not doing the healing. They are just a channel. They are just a vessel to allow a person to heal themselves. And Jennifer works kind of under the same pretense, and Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff.
Footnote, I think, what you said is really important too for people that are maybe new to this stuff, which is, kind of vesselhood is an excellent qualifier for kind of authenticity in my experience. Anytime someone says, it ain't me, I'm just a vessel for the light, I'm just a vessel for what comes through, that is, or maybe that's just good marketing material again. But, when someone says, this is me, I'm the healer, you're welcome from me to, it seems at odds, or maybe, charlatan kind of qualifications are, phony bullet points are, they're the authority, they're the ultimate source of it. And people who, I think tend to actually do it and actually manifest some of this stuff in reality, there's never an egoistic claim attached to it.
I feel a little behind the two of you in that sense. I've of course I've heard of Richard through you since high school, but haven't really experienced anything firsthand, which I think puts me in the camp with most people.
You're in Chicago, but I know.
Well, yeah. But most people like me, at the very least, usually have, in my case, like that I can think of, 1 to 2, just like stories from your life that you can't really explain, and you just kind of put them in this little, I don't know, pocket in your mind of, okay, that happened, I can't explain that, and that's fine, moving on and carry on with the rest of my life. Like a friend of mine, when I was a kid, she got in a car accident, and her mother, who's like a lawyer, this very practical lady, told me the next day that she like jolted to attention by herself in the middle of a room and just like became like consumed with worry and had to call her daughter immediately, and then found out that her daughter had just been in a car accident. And she just told me that off as an aside, and that has just been in the back of my mind ever since. And to return to this metaphysical notion that the only way I could explain that is if consciousness was fundamental versus matter. Right. That's just one little anecdotal thing that happened to me.
No, so. It must have been just I mean, it's, we dismiss it, especially in the West. I mean, in America and the Western world, because we are so kind of scientific materialism foundational, oh, that's a strange thing. Oh, well, move on with your life. Whereas, Vedic philosophy or something, it's more of a sign. It's more of a, or tribal philosophy, etc. I think what you're talking about too is synchronicities, is what Carl Jung, the famous psychotherapist, disciple of Freud, we are going to do one on you. So my catchphrase continues.
Yeah, big guy.
He influenced so many different schools of thought. Philosophy, certainly, psychotherapy, psychology, literature with the archetypes and myth studies. But yeah, synchronicity was a huge thing that he talked about, which was, it literally means falling together in time. And what the story you explained sounded like the scarab story, which was he had a young woman who was a patient of his, who described having a dream over and over again of a golden scarab, and he was seeing her recount the latest session, and he heard a tap on the window and walked up to the window, and there was a scarab, gold, that same exact thing that she described on the window. And that was kind of a foundational moment for him of the connectedness between those kinds of things, between dream world, and he talked a lot about dreams, but merely coincidences versus some significance, some spiritual component to these kinds of events.
Yeah. And then in their isolation, they're easier to brush off. And then it's harder to brush them
Right.
off when there's dozens or hundreds or thousands of them that start stacking up
Totally.
in your life.
Totally. Yeah. Once you have a handful, you're hooked. There's no going back. And I think the Ram Dass Maharaji stories, and Ram Dass was a teacher, Harvard professor, a big influence on all of us. His guru, I mean, that's all of those stories were just little plays of consciousness that Maharaji Neem Karoli Baba would kind of continually affirm. Ram Dass is like, he knew everything. He knew things that he could never have known, on multiple occasions. And so we'll get into them, but super important. I did want to touch on astrological principles, because if we're talking about metaphysics, ancient chakras, Hermeticism, let's just go all out and add astrology to it all. I think if and we talked about this before recording, but if there's a individual teacher that represents, it might be easier for people to associate the mindful, metaphysical, and non-dual with a person. Thich Nhat Hanh, we talked a lot about him in the mindful episode. Zen Buddhist master, could be the mindful kind of representative. Metaphysical's probably got to be Yogananda, Hindu yoga teacher from the early 20th century. And, he just wrote so much. He taught so much and lived here in America. And just real quick about him, because I was going to mention it earlier, but there was a Swami Vivekananda who came to America in the 1890s. He was incredible. He was really the first Swami pretty much to set foot over here. But he was only here for a few years. Yogananda comes in 1920, 100 years ago, the centennial of Yogananda's arrival in America, and basically lived in California for the next 30 years of his life. And so he just was this massive force in bringing Vedic philosophy of the Vedas, which is a Hindu text, and Kriya Yoga was his technique of yoga, to Americans. His book, again, Autobiography of a Yogi, it really changed a lot for us. George Harrison, the Beatle, the spiritual Beatle, was huge into Yogananda. They're actually, the Yogananda lineage of gurus are on Sgt. Pepper on the cover. And Steve Jobs also was another person that people might not be aware of, who read Autobiography of a Yogi every year. Everyone at his funeral got a copy of it. I mean, he was obsessed with Yogananda.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So pretty cool. I mean, he's a big deal. This is a little piece, back to astrology. That was kind of my Yogananda excerpt there, and we'll probably talk about him constantly, but throughout the duration of this whole show and beyond. But astrology has pagan roots, but it also has Vedic roots. Egypt, what was it? The Dogon people in Africa. I mean, so many ancient cultures read the stars. And there's another great moment in Autobiography. It's called Outwitting the Stars, is the chapter where his guru says, you should get this armlet, get an iron bangle, go get one. And he goes, should I master? I don't believe in astrology. And Sri Yukteswar's guru says, it's never a question of belief. The only scientific attitude one can take on any subject is whether it's true. The law of gravitation worked as efficiently before Newton as after him. The cosmos would be fairly chaotic if its laws could not operate without the sanction of human belief. He says, charlatans have brought the stellar science to its present state of disrepute. Astrology is too vast, both mathematically and philosophically, to be rightly grasped except by men and women of profound understanding. If ignoramuses misread the heavens and see there as a scrawl instead of a script, that is to be expected in this imperfect world. One should not dismiss the wisdom with the wise. That's in his disclaimer, but he goes on to say, that Yogananda's guru, All parts of creation are linked together and interchange their influences. The balanced rhythm of the universe is rooted in reciprocity. Man, in his human aspect, has to combat two sets of forces. First, the tumults within his own being. Second, the outer disintegrating powers of nature. Astrology is the study of man's response to planetary stimuli. The stars have no conscious benevolence or animosity. They merely send forth positive and negative radiations. Of themselves, these do not help or harm humanity, but offer a lawful channel for the outward operation of cause-effect equilibriums with which each man has set into motion in the past. Last piece here. A child is born on that day and at that hour when the celestial rays are in mathematical harmony with his individual karma. His horoscope is a challenging portrait, revealing his unalterable past and its probable future results. But the natal chart can be rightly interpreted only by men of intuitive wisdom. The message boldly blazoned across the heavens at the moment of birth is not meant to emphasize fate, the result of past good and evil, but to arouse man's will to escape from his universal thraldom. What he has done, he can undo. None other than himself was the instigator of the causes of whatever effects are now prevalent in his life. He can overcome any limitation because he created it by his own actions in the first place, and because he has spiritual resources which are not subject to planetary pressure. Superstitious awe of astrology makes one an automaton, slavishly dependent on mechanical guidance. The wise man defeats his planets, which is to say his past, by transferring his allegiance from the creation to the creator. The more he realizes his unity with spirit, the less he can be dominated by matter. The soul is ever free. It is deathless because birthless. It cannot be regimented by stars. So, I mean, I kind of had to read the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because it's that good.
It's so good.
But
it is good.
He disclaimer on phonies, what the reality of it, and the fact that you're not a slave to it.
Yeah, that it doesn't mean fate, which a lot of people push back on that because they're like, oh, I don't believe in fate. And he's like, actually, it's not what it's saying. It's just saying that this is your past. And I love my favorite quote. I almost want a T-shirt that says "Defeat your planets" because I love that line.
That's great. We should make that. I love it. He has a lot of singers. I mean, Shuk Teshwar was one of the greats for sure. So I think that's. We're welcome to add, but it's similarly kind of throughout the metaphysical. Maybe the theme of is like when people just dismiss some of this stuff, like, oh, what's your horoscope? It just says you're gonna do something today. It's like, haha, like that's like the meme or whatever of like making fun of astrology and horoscopes. It's like there's a lot of phonies and charlatans or whatever that don't read it correctly, and it ultimately you don't have to be controlled by them. But it's interesting to understand like just the idea that look, these planets are huge. You've seen the diagrams online of where it's like the Earth and then it's just like, I mean, unbelievably incomprehensible size differences between Jupiter and Earth. And, when they orbit around in the solar system, they're moving things. I mean, we're talking about vibrations and energy earlier. Celestial bodies that large are pushing and pulling different things. And, it's not that really much of a surprise. We're just a bunch of apes that are 5-6 feet tall walking around. I mean, it's like, of course we're going to be affected by something that large, and the kind of currents of different energies hitting the Earth. So anyway, don't want to go on too much about that, but just wanted to mention that astrology and astrological principles are certainly part of metaphysics.
Reminded me of the always spooky action at a distance. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah.
Oh, right. I've always felt the same way in trying to think about astrology and the effects that the planets have on us. I mean, literally all of our planets are floating in this gravitational pull around the sun, right? And if you think of like placing those planets in like a bowl of water and then dipping your finger in it, there's going to be shock waves that are probably not going to be able to be felt on our kind of like physical level as a human, but on a much deeper level that you're maybe not aware of, or able to be, so like consciously aware of as like, stubbing your toe. But yeah, I really enjoy astrology. I think there's a really big difference of what that description that you just described, though, from Sri Yukteswar, versus kind of how astrology is portrayed in kind of pop culture. And I think the biggest difference was that he mentioned that, like, it's not like you have to surrender to this. Like, it's not like this is what is going to control you. It's like, here is a potential kind of roadmap, and it's your job to overcome it, and I feel like a lot of my friends that are into astrology, and just a lot of people in general, are like, this astrological thing is coming up and it's going to make these 3 months difficult in this way, so I'm just
too far the other end.
I'm just going to surrender to, and it's like, this is just the way it's going to be for those 3 months. And that's, to me, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it is more of here's a warning that this is going to change a little bit, but not just like giving your whole self away to that, and choosing to overcome it, so I really like his description that you read.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. Yeah, it's funny that I think if I have any hesitations about this episode in particular, it's like kind of more outing, but because where I'm like, it's okay, skeptics, like, see, there's like scientific backing, I'm like addressing that voice, as opposed to like, actually, there's probably people that will be listening to this that are very vibe on the spirit side of things, and yeah, I mean, I think addressing this pendulum swing, there really is I think you can still stay critical and practical, within these schools of thought. It's like, let's acknowledge all of them, but be discerning. I don't think it necessarily means we can just we have to accept everything. We can still question things. We can still find that kind of happy medium.
Absolutely.
There's just more to it all, I mean, I think that's really the thesis of this whole show. I think particularly the metaphysical stuff is, it's far out, and we talked about limitations last week with the mindfulness, and like, the limitation on metaphysical is its far outness, or just being called crazy, or whatever, but kind of, as we said earlier, questioning the validity of things, is scientific. Damn it, really exploring this. It's unfortunate to me where like people like Bill Maher will say, who I do like some of his stuff, will say like, well, ancient fairy tales, like his movie Religulous, it was like just him going around interviewing like hicks basically in the South, and like just doing circles around them intellectually, and it's like, well, see, religion's stupid, and like it's like there's more to it, Bill. Like you're not, you're folks like that are very dismissive. Like ancient fairy tales, like, yeah, like there's stuff in the Bible that's made up, and it's like the lion didn't talk to Daniel or whatever, like, okay, I get that, but it's not black and white.
Yeah. To me, you're describing the skepticism and cynicism, and there's kind of a subtle difference between the two. And
yeah, sure.
I have to mention one of my favorite, he's kind of a hero of mine, and he was a Belgian Catholic priest, and he was also a physicist, George Lemaitre. And he was he didn't get recognized for it a lot, but he was basically one of the first scientists to figure out the life of the universe, the Big Bang. He postulated it. He was describing it before it had been verified, and he's this and after that theory kind of came out, and obviously there was a lot of discussion and argument about that, but after the theory of the Big Bang came out, like the Pope at that time came out and said, here's our proof that God created the universe. And Lemaitre, a Catholic, but Lemaitre, a Catholic priest, like pushed back on the Pope on that point. And he was just trying to describe that he could contain within himself two concepts of, and his faith and his discovery of the physical universe, and that he, this is just him. He wasn't a fan of trying to blend those two. And he said that there is a place for faith, because at certain point, sooner or later, you're going to have to jump off from what's proven. And I don't know. I love his, because, you're right. The metaphysical stuff, it might even scare away more people than non-dualism, because it's kind of where the rubber meets the road from like science and faith. And it's just hard to decide what to do with these different schools, I guess. And I wanted to mention him because he was a devout Catholic and an amazing, brilliant physicist. And he was totally okay with those two things existing in his mind at the same time. And he got great things from both of them. And that's not to say that in the future they can't blend, but where he was at that moment, I liked his reaction to that.
Yeah, multifaceted. It's multifaceted. I mean, I think, even to that point of like him pushing back on the Pope, I wrote this down here on kind of the concluding points of like, even most atheists, like I just listened to this hilarious interview between Ricky Gervais and Russell Brand, two great British comics, and Gervais is like hardline atheist and Brand is kind of a mystic guy now and does meditation and stuff. And Ricky was, very quick to admit that like he doesn't have an issue with like connectedness or, kind of, he's like sacredness of nature is like so huge to him. He's a very passionate animal rights activist. But that it's the institutions is mostly, what he has an issue with as far as like the hypocrisy, which we talk about in the Easter app, but like, how like the institutions of the religion set up certain people for, dominion over others. Like he was like, like how strange, like it's exactly who we are the ones that are the right, like that's what they all say, all the texts, that is an issue for us too. I think the mystical point of view, the non-religious institution spiritual view is, similar criticism, frankly, of the institutions and of like, kind of empty institutional structures devoid of the love of the spiritual connectivity and harmony. I laugh at some of those jokes about the Bible and, hypocrisy and like the, preposterousness of some of all this stuff too. I mean, it's like, doesn't mean we're, we can't enjoy, and enjoy those points as well. It seems to be, not necessarily the belief or the openness or the questioning of the current paradigm, but rather, just dumb humans, I think is the main issue. Or not dumb, but you know what I mean? Domineering, hypocritical.
Yeah, when you start mixing politics with faith, things can get ugly pretty quickly.
Spirituality, yeah. Yeah, and even the guru side, I mean, love Yogananda, he's had, SRF has had like 0 scandals in 100 years of self-realization fellowship, which is rare for a religious organization. There's a temple in Austin, Texas that had a guru scandal where this guy, these women came out and said that this guy was inappropriate with them when they were younger, and he fled to India. He escaped. And I remember that happened. It was at Barsana Dham, which I don't know the new title. That was the old title. But I was like getting really into, I was on like my 4th book about Hinduism or something, and I was like really getting into it. And then that happened, and it was a perfect timing. I mean, it's terrible that happened, but it was good timing for me, intellectually, because it just affirmed that it's not like it shouldn't be like this one's good and this one's bad, like, oh, Christianity's oh man, that's outdated, but Hinduism is good. Like that's not it either. Like there's truth in all of them, and there's corruption in all of them, and there's good in all of them, and there's evil in all of them, and there's just a lot of layers.
Yeah, and we see that over and over, that when people get put in positions of power, they will abuse it a lot, and that happens, and that is the danger. It's like there's these beautiful faiths that because of how powerful the faith is, we as humans tend to create political hierarchies out of that when that shows up, and it creates problems. But yeah.
Wait, they'll do anything that I say? Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's dangerous. Which is why I love the mystic traditions, because they're decidedly non-hierarchical and focused on internal discovery.
Yes. Yeah, and they killed them too. I mean, the religion, the institutions killed the mystics in the past. Now we have like the Bill of Rights, and it's not everywhere. It's not in China and Saudi Arabia and other places where people can't speak their mind. But now you can read about Hinduism, and like the Kabbalion and stuff like that was esoteric kind of hidden teachings. That's what mystic philosophy is. They kind of had to hide it because the institutional structures were so powerful that they Mansur al-Hallaj is a famous example, who was killed. He was a Sufi Muslim for saying Anal Haq, which translates roughly to like "I am God." Is like it's like English doesn't really do it right, but what he meant was like I have divinity, or I have that sense of the divine, which is Hinduism basically. That's what Namaste means. And the religious authority at the time wasn't a big fan of that and hanged him. And he famously danced to the gallows in chains because he was ecstatic about this realization. And Scott and I mean, we've all three talked about this a lot, but Scott and I had a conversation recently of like any kind of like secular or scientific minds that like are against the religious orthodox like hypocrisy, like they killed my guys too. Like I'm that's not my team. I mean, it's like the devoid of those power structures seems to be the most loving way, at least I should say, because there's benefits to institutional religion also, and I feel like I do need to make that disclaimer. Because it is for some people, and there are authentic seekers that are affiliated with religion, and I honor them, and I honor their sincerity, and we need more of you guys. I mean, I do stuff at a food bank, and that sounded wrong. I do stuff I go to a food bank and help these people cook. It sounds like a problem with the police. I've helped out there, and it's at a church, and they're like all super legit Christians, and that to me is Christianity at its core. That's the real teaching, is service, the least of these. This famous guy talked about. So there are true affiliated religious people, and not to dismiss them, but to be critical of the institution. So anyway, all that said, that's mostly what I got for the metaphysical episode. Kind of all over the place. Feels like I rushed some sections, but hopefully it was educational. It sounded like you guys learned some new stuff, and hopefully our listeners did as well. I think these early episodes are really just touching. We're kind of running through these topics, which I'm ready to get beyond. We're going to do non-dual next, which is also going to be a bit far out, but after that one, then we'll kind of spend more time with a topic and really, I think, unpack a bit further. So stick around for those as well. There is a part here that I wrote just to like edit notes. There's a Ram Dass interview where the interviewer asks him, like about his certainty. He's like, I'm not asking you like, prove it, but I'm asking you like, how'd you get so certain about this stuff? Because he just kind of speaks about it all so matter of factly in the whole interview. It's so good. And his answer was, he's like, there's three ways, really. There's three reasons that validate it. My baby's up, so we're closing out here. But one is your studies. Two is you know somebody who knows and they tell you how it is and you trust them, would be Maharshi. And three, by your direct experience. So psychedelics or meditation or just being around holy people and kind of synchronicities that Jung talks about. You know, those three things combined. Not one of those, not just reading about it, not just knowing a guru figure, and not just having an experience, but if all those three are layered in together, you know, then you can start to think that there's some validity. Which I like that.
Yeah, I like that.
Cool. Well, I think we can probably use that in there, and thanks, guys. Thanks for this long, fast, endless posturing one, but hopefully it was helpful.
Yeah, it was good. A lot of good stuff in there.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Mm-hmm. If we weren't outed already,
yeah, no, this is it.
Now we are. Publish.